In this video, we're going to talk about the RAAS system, the renin-angiotensin-aldosterone system, or RAAS, or renin-angiotensin system. So this is the big picture. The overall goal of this system is to elevate blood pressure, and that's accomplished in a few different ways. One is by increasing blood volume. That's going to lead to an increase in peripheral resistance, resistance being the opposition to blood flow. An increase in peripheral resistance is always going to lead to, or should always lead to, an increase in blood pressure by the heart. So to increase blood volume, there's a couple of ways to do that, and several hormones that do it. So we can retain more sodium from the kidney tubules, and retaining means bringing that atom in this case, to the bloodstream from the kidney tubules, or what would become urine. Water follows salt, so if you retain more salt or sodium, we'll retain more water. We can also retain more water directly. Another way of accomplishing the goal of increasing blood pressure is to increase the vasoconstriction of the arterioles. This leads to, and you should actually include that right here before peripheral resistance, a decrease in the diameter of the blood vessel. That decrease is going to increase peripheral resistance and increase blood pressure. The increase in peripheral resistance when the arteriole's diameter is decreased is because there is an increase in the turbulent flow of blood as opposed to laminar flow, which is an easier, smoother flow. We can also increase the number of action potentials that are targeted at the myocardium, and we can increase the strength of contraction of the myocardium by recruiting more sarcomeres, more of those structural and functional units of the muscle tissue. So the stimuli for initiating the RAAS system include a decrease in blood volume. Now in some cases that decrease is detected as a high sodium content relative to water in the plasma, or it's a low water content of blood. So if you were hemorrhaging, that would actually trigger both of these responses, that major loss of blood. If there's a decrease in blood pressure, which could happen for many reasons, the central nervous system isn't working properly, an increase in blood potassium levels will also stimulate the system. And in this case, the increase in blood pressure that ultimately results is to force more blood to the kidneys so that they can filter out more potassium. Those increased potassium levels can adversely affect the neuron's action potential, the action potential at the autorhythmic cells of the myocardium, and of muscle, both skeletal and cardiac muscle primarily. This would also affect smooth muscle as well. However, remember that the RAAS system isn't the only way to raise blood pressure. That can be done directly through the sympathetic nervous system. So the details of the system. So one way I would suggest that you learn this, because it's really important, it comes up in pretty much every chapter that we talk about in A&P2, is to figure out how to memorize the system from angiotensinogen to the formation of angiotensin II. And then from there, work on the effects that angiotensin II causes. So let's look at the kidney's role in the RAAS system first. So in this very fuzzy picture, you're seeing the juxtaglomerular apparatus, also called juxtaglomerular complex. And in here are three key cells of the kidney that are important in understanding the RAAS. This is a nephron. These are the kidney tubules that we discuss the hormones like aldosterone and ADH affecting. So we have three key cells. This is the glomerulus. Those are capillaries that are bringing blood from the renal artery in the aorta. There's the macula densa cells. These are chemoreceptors. So they're monitoring what is going to be made into urine. In this area are the granular cells, and they are baroreceptors who also release renin. Then between these, and it's a little hard to see in this picture, there are the extraglomerular mesangial cells. Those cells allow the macula densa and the granular cells to communicate with each other. So if the macula densa, which are chemoreceptors, pick up that there's too much sodium, they trigger the granular cells via the extraglomerular mesangial cells to release renin. So here's the details of the RAAS system. The liver is always producing angiotensinogen, which is a pro-hormone or an inactive hormone. In times of low blood pressure, it will produce more. The kidneys, who monitor renal perfusion, that's how much blood flow goes through the kidneys, do that with glomerular cells, which are, these should be granular cells. The granular cells are baroreceptors in the kidney, they're pressure receptors, and they release renin. The extraglomerular mesangial cells allow the granular cells and the macula densa cells to communicate with each other. The macula densa cells are chemoreceptors that monitor the amount of sodium in filtrate, or what's going to become urine. So, the kidney releases from its granular cells renin. Renin works as an enzyme that triggers the conversion or cleaves angiotensinogen to angiotensin 1, still an inactive chemical. There are certain epithelial cells of the lungs and of the kidneys who detect hypoxia. So when they do, they release ACE, angiotensin converting enzyme. Make sure you know what ACE stands for. The ACE, an enzyme, is used to cleave angiotensin 1 to angiotensin 2. And angiotensin 2 is the active chemical of the RAAS system, the first one. So it has many, many effects. The first, and I'm going to start from the bottom, is that it triggers the hypothalamus to send action potentials to the posterior pituitary gland. The posterior pituitary gland releases ADH, antidiuretic hormone. ADH then has two major effects, and only one is shown in this picture. In extreme circumstances, ADH will bind to the smooth muscle of arterioles and cause an increase in vasoconstriction. The increase in vasoconstriction will cause a decrease in the diameter of the blood vessel, which leads to an increase in peripheral resistance and thus an increase in blood pressure. The second effect of ADH is that it binds to cells of the kidney tubules, and the kidney tubules then produce more aquaporins. The more aquaporins allows a greater rate of facilitated diffusion of water back to the bloodstream from urine. The increase in water retention leads to an increase in blood volume, an increase in peripheral resistance, and thus an increase in blood pressure. A direct effect of angiotensin 2 is that it can bind directly to the smooth muscle of the arterioles. That will cause a decrease in the diameter of the blood vessel, which increases peripheral resistance and increases blood pressure. Angiotensin 2 can also act on the zona fasciculata of the adrenal cortex. That's going to cause the release of mineralcorticoids such as aldosterone. Aldosterone then binds to the kidney tubules and forces them to retain more sodium from urine to the blood, as well as more chloride, and to excrete more potassium. Remember, high potassium was one of the triggers for the RAAS system. Since water follows salt, retaining more sodium leads to retaining more water by osmosis. That increases blood volume and increases blood pressure because of the increase in peripheral resistance. Now, angiotensin II can also have exactly the same effect as aldosterone when it too binds to the kidney tubules. When angiotensin II binds to the kidney tubules, it causes an increase in sodium retention and potassium excretion, which means water is going to follow salt back to the bloodstream, increase blood volume, increase peripheral resistance, and increase blood pressure. Now, the last thing that angiotensin II can do is by acting on the hypothalamus, it causes an increase in sympathetic activity, increased activity of the sympathetic nervous system. So that increase in sympathetic activity is going to cause the hypothalamus to send action potentials to the adrenal medulla, who will then produce more epinephrine and norepinephrine, and the hypothalamus itself will release more epinephrine. The epinephrine then binds to beta adrenergic receptors on the myocardium, or on the heart muscle itself. This is going to cause an increase in the number of action potentials that are sent through the heart, and that will increase heart rate and the force of contraction. The second thing that the binding of epinephrine to the beta adrenergic receptors on the myocardium will do is, through a CAMP, second messenger system, there will be channels on the heart muscle cells themselves that open for calcium, and channels on the sarcoplasmic reticulum, a specialized form of smooth endoplasmic reticulum that will open within the cell. That will lead to an increase in intracellular calcium availability, meaning more calcium is available inside the cell. That increase in calcium allows more troponin C to be unlocked from troponin, or from tropomyosin rather, and more sarcomeres to be engaged, which leads to a stronger contraction of the heart. If epinephrine binds to the alpha adrenergic receptors, those are on the smooth muscle of the arterioles, and that will cause an increase in vasoconstriction, and hence a decrease in the blood vessel's diameter, leading to an increase in peripheral resistance and blood pressure. I hope you've enjoyed this discussion of the RAAS system.